Ladies and gentlemen, did you notice that the great bulk of his material was simply trying to tie passages together, one right after another, on the basis of similarity of language? And so I'd like to illustrate the absurdity of that type of argumentation.
For every one of those moments,
This is ridiculous!
there's one of these.
Is this my car? What? This is ridiculous.
This can't be happening!
This can't be happening.
Oh, it's happening, sweetheart.
Oh, it's happening, sweetheart.
Shut up.
Shut up!
The exact same language, two different events. Two different events. I illustrated last time from two scriptures that he totally ignored. Amos 1:2 and Joel 3:16. Those two passages say, "And Jehovah shall roar from Zion." Yet Amos 1:2 deals with the destruction of Israel, particularly the city of Samaria, by the Assyrians, while Joel 3:16 is a judgment upon Gentile nations that, if you take Joel chronologically, would occur after the day of Pentecost. And so it creates quite a problem for him, inasmuch as those two events were centuries apart. Similarity of language only proves similarity of subject matter. It does not establish the sameness of the event. And he ought to know that. By the way, he keeps referring to Brother Foy Wallace. Are you aware Brother Wallace believes that Daniel 2:44 and 45 refer to the destruction of the Roman Empire? Are you aware that he also taught that the book of Revelation goes on to look at events beyond AD 70? Are you familiar with that? You seem to just use him as you please, just like you do Brother Camp. And as I pointed out in the last debate, that is not right. That is not right, brethren. These men are not here to defend themselves. And yet he's trying to imply they are in agreement with him. Both of those men I knew. Both of those men openly condemned the teaching of Max King, which is pretty much what these brethren are teaching. Especially at the time that Brother King was teaching before he went into universalism. And they would especially attack that today and condemn it. So he needs to represent Brother Wallace more properly across the board. He also, again, referred to Green, and he ignored a question I asked. Is he saying that Green believed that one could interpret the aorist indicative, particularly with the augment, just any old way he wants? He didn't address that. That was not Dr. Green's position. He knows better. And yet it implied, by the way in which he quoted him, that possibility. Then there's Matthew chapter 10, verse 23. And I told you he would be in a contradiction if he applied this to the destruction of Jerusalem. Look at the last part of Matthew 10:23. You shall not have gone over all the cities of Israel till I come. You shall not have gone over all the cities of Israel till I come. Colossians 1:6 and 23, he quoted to say that the gospel had gone into all the world. Well, how can it be that the apostles carried the gospel into all the world by the time of Colossians 1:6 and 23, which was around AD 63, 70 years before the destruction of Jerusalem, but they hadn't been through all the cities of Israel? That's a contradiction. And whether he likes it or not, it contradicts one another. Then in Matthew chapter 28, verse 20, he said that the world there is the end of the Jewish age. Fine, if he wants to take that position, I'd disagree with him. I believe the age is the present age, and it lasts till the end of the physical world. My point is that given his position, Matthew 28 verse 20 would imply that the Great Commission ended in AD 70. But he said in his answer to one of our questions, it did not end in AD 70. And he tried to quote a passage or cite a passage from Revelation chapter 21 verse 24 that had nothing to do with the preaching of the gospel. There's no mention of preaching in that verse. And so this is a situation he's stuck with. He has the Great Commission ending, and yet he's up here debating and preaching. In fact, he is praising Brother Bell for what he believes Bell's doing in the way of evangelism. And yet he has no authority. Neither one of them do. Given their doctrine, they have no authority to preach to anybody, because all of the passages written against the background of judgment ended in AD 70. When the Holy Spirit came and did his work among the apostles, what was he to do? He was to reprove the world of sin and righteousness and what? The judgment to come. Well, if the judgment to come has taken place, then the teaching and so on concerning sin and righteousness has also ceased. That has come to an end. That work has been accomplished, and it's finished completely. And so there's no need for teaching on sin and righteousness. The judgment's passed, according to Brother Neubauer. When Paul preached to Felix, the last thing that was stressed was the fact that there's a coming judgment. And it was in view of that Felix quaked. He quaked in view of that teaching. And so again, if everything has passed, if this is it, this is the ultimate state, then there's no need for temperance and things of that nature anymore. It's all been consummated. And then in Daniel 2, 44 and 45, he made the statement right out the bat that the kingdom, that is the kingdom of heaven, consumed all of the kingdoms. Well, doesn't that imply that the kingdom in some sense destroyed every one of them? It does not necessitate that the kingdom of heaven, actually destroyed the city of Babylon, the physical city, but the territory, the whole region, and everything, every aspect of it had been taken over by the Romans. They controlled it. And when Rome fell, everything that belonged to the Babylonians, everything that belonged to the Medo-Persians, everything that belonged to the Macedon Greeks fell with it. And when was that? Again, historians say 476 AD. He doesn't like that. That's tough. History is history. He can't rewrite it as to the way he wished it had happened. Then he says the law was ended by the cross, but not at the cross. Well, if the law was nailed to the cross, Colossians 2 verse 14, isn't that at the cross? If you're on something, aren't you at it? Or is there some sort of, again, change in the definition of words? Again, that's just silly. Then he went to the Olivet prophecy. He asserted Luke 17 refers to AD 70. He didn't try to prove it. He just, again, on the basis of similarity of language, I believe it refers to the end of time, the second coming. And by the way, we ask him, if the Bible implies that time ends, is there not such a thing as the time of the end of time? And he admitted that in the last debate. So I don't know why he continues to fuss about it. Then we had this matter that pertained to Daniel 12. He said he had a transition passage, Daniel 11. I want you to take a look at it. Daniel 11, verse 33. If you notice, the King James Version, the word many is in italics. And he really stressed that word many. Do you know what his favorite version reads? It just reads days. Not there. Not there. Young's literal translation. I've got a copy. You're not going to like Young's when I get done with you. You're not going to care for him too much on a number of passages. When you endorse the translation the way you did in the last debate, you're going to have some trouble with it. Daniel 11:33 reads days, not many days. That's the text he tried to use. Days. And so many's not in the original. Then, concerning Brother Bell, you notice he didn't answer the question I really asked. He got up here and he said, well, I disagree with him on something, but he's a great man on other things, really praised him to the high heaven. I asked him if he was in fellowship with him. It's either a yes or no. Are you in fellowship with William Bell? It's that simple. That's not hard to answer. Do you fellowship William Bell? It's strange, brethren. It's an interesting situation. Someone pointed out to me if Brother Bell or Brother Preston showed up at the debate, they said, you know, historically, that's almost like when the premillennial brethren joined up with J. Frank Norris to try to promote premillennialism. Here we've got these fellows joining hands together with Brother Bell and Brother Preston, who are now full-blown sectarians. They're now fellowshipping denominational preachers. They're fellowshipping various denominational churches. And here are these brethren assisting them in their work, and vice versa. If that's not fellowship, what is that? As one good brother from the city of Baker would say, Baker, Florida here, they're in cahoots with one another. That's fellowship. Then he wants to play a game of one-upmanship on evangelism. Well, I've baptized quite a few, and I could stand up here and talk about what we've done and all that in 40-something years. But will numbers prove whether one is right or wrong? Does it? Was Baal right because he had more followers at times than Jehovah God? Was that the case? Was that so? The Jehovah's Witnesses have a whole lot more members than you do. So do the Mormons. Your quibbling up here about Brother Baal is simply an appeal to look at us. Look what wonderful people we are. We're evangelizing and trying to one up. I'm not going to play that game with you. We need to deal with whether or not Brother Baal is teaching false doctrine in certain areas and practicing false doctrine by what he's doing, and he is. And so if you want him to be involved with your work and vice versa, you ought to be open about it and tell brethren that you are in fellowship or that you're not in fellowship and dismiss him. One of the two. You can't play middle ground. There's no middle ground here. You're either in fellowship or not in fellowship, and you understand the law of excluded middle. Two of the best men in logic in the brotherhood taught you about it. You either are in fellowship or you're not in fellowship with him on this. So you need to understand that and make that point, deal with it forthrightly here. Then, concerning the Olivet prophecy, I have called on him. I called on him during the last debate several times, as well as during the, I've done it to several of their people online, and none of them have addressed it. I've called on them to deal with the temporal markers that are found in the Olivet prophecy. He talks about time markers, about time indicators, and so on. Well, Matthew chapter 24, Luke chapter 21, Mark 13 have a bunch of adverb temporal markers, time indicators, as you would call them. You need to address those. In fact, there's one in Matthew 24, verse 21. Immediately after, or immediately in those days. Notice this. I want you to take a look at it. Matthew chapter 24, verse 21. For then shall be, then tate, shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time. So the tribulation that is under consideration here begins with the destruction of Jerusalem. It doesn't precede the destruction of Jerusalem. Now look down in verse 29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days. Well, if this tribulation coincides with the destruction of Jerusalem or is occasioned by it, then at some point it comes to an end and something else takes place. If verse 29 is the destruction of Jerusalem, then how do you explain this immediately after the tribulation? If the tribulation terminates in AD 70 with the destruction, you've got another temporal marker you need to deal with. There's a bunch more after that. That's not the only one. He also brought up Revelation chapter 1. And all of this talking about Revelation. And is the word apocalypsis ever used in another sense or ever used of other events than the second coming of Christ? There are 3 different uses of apocalypsis in the New Testament. There are 4 different uses of apocalypto. And I'd like for him to try to deal with those. Galatians 2:12, for example, is one passage. Galatians 1:12, excuse me. Galatians 1:12. In Revelation chapter 1, I pointed out in the last debate that we have aorist ingressives that are used in this statement, must come to pass soon. Literally, it means to begin to come to pass. And most commentators take it as so. And we can lay that case out. Zechariah chapter 14, he said, was the destruction of Jerusalem. Do you know that at the close of Zechariah 14, Jerusalem is pictured as being blessed, being dwelt in, and all sorts of other great things? What he has to do is suddenly, in Zechariah 14, switch Jerusalem there to the church, while he ignores the fact that he was talking about the literal city in the first half of the chapter. So again, he has to change definitions to suit his doctrine. He also claimed in the last debate the vast majority of reputable commentators supported the position that Zechariah 14 is the destruction of Jerusalem. Hogwash. I probably have far more commentaries on the book of Zechariah than all 3 of you put together. And do you know that only a handful hold to the AD 70 position? Only a handful. Zechariah 14, they can't prove that it's the destruction of Jerusalem, yet their doctrine depends on it. Let's see. He talked about the abomination of desolation. There are 2 different abominations. One in Daniel 7, relative to Daniel's 70 weeks, and that's the one Jesus is referring to. The one in chapter 12 in Daniel is referring to the one at the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. The fact that there's one that occurred in the course of the destruction of Jerusalem does not preclude the fact that there could be one, and was one, that occurred at the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. What did he say about Daniel 12, verse 7? Not a peep. Not a peep. The holy people. What about that? The holy people. He says these were the Jews at the time of the destruction of Jerusalem. Were they holy? Then he said, well, he brought up Daniel 12, verse 2. Here's a passage that mentions resurrection from the dead. I dealt with that in the last debate. He's ignored that fact. Daniel 12, verse 2 is simply a case of the principle of accommodation in the area of dual reference. That is where the Holy Spirit inspires a New Testament writer or speaker to lift a passage from an Old Testament text, many times just one verse, sometimes 2 verses or so, but only specific verses, applies them to events yet future. That does not mean the entire chapter, therefore, applies to the future. In the principle of accommodation, it is one verse. Take Isaiah chapter 9, for example. You can show from various passages that Isaiah 9, verse 6 applies to Jesus Christ and is used in an accommodative way in various texts. But does that mean that everything that is said in Isaiah chapter 9 applied to Christ? Absolutely not. The same thing relative to Isaiah chapter 7. Thank you.